The Velkari Empire ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years, and no species had ever been able to resist their expansion. Their fleets numbered in the millions, and their colonies spanned 100,000 worlds. They had conquered so many civilizations that they stopped counting centuries ago. When scouts discovered Earth in 2047, they expected this conquest to be as easy as the previous ones. Zutron, commander of the Imperial Conquest Fleet, stared at the blue planet on the view screen with nothing but boredom. He had done this hundreds of times before. The procedure was simple. First, he would demand unconditional surrender. If the primitive species refused, he would demonstrate his power by destroying several cities. If they refused, he threatened to wipe the population centers and enslave the survivors. Humanity refused to surrender. Zutron gave the order without hesitation. Over the course of 6 hours, a hail of kinetic energy bombardment hit every major population center on Earth. A giant metal rod accelerated at incredible speeds, fell from orbit, and hit the Earth with the force of a nuclear weapon. Beijing vanished in a flash of light. New York was reduced to dust. Mumbai, Los Angeles, Sao Paulo, London, Tokyo, Sydney, and hundreds of cities that had existed for centuries were reduced to craters of molten glass. 7 billion people died that day. The Velkari recorded this as a small-scale suppression operation. They left behind a nominal occupation force of 3 cruisers to manage the scattered survivors of the 800 million refugees. The survivors were primarily from the countryside and small towns far from major cities. They were now homeless and leaderless, wandering a devastated world. At least, that's what the Velkari believed. Deep beneath the Colorado Rocky Mountains lies a facility built in secret over the course of more than 50 years. The Earth Defense Forces always knew that humanity might one day face a threat from beyond the stars. Even though most people on Earth were unaware of the facility's existence, they were prepared for that day. Admiral Daniel Harper stood in his command center, watching the destruction of his planet on a flickering screen. Distant impacts shook bunkers and obliterated city after city. Around him stood the last remaining command center of the Earth Defense Federation, the 200 officers and specialists who had been on duty when the attack began. His daughter, Emma, was in Chicago visiting her grandmother. His wife, Catherine, was at a conference in London. Daniel had just had an argument with Catherine that morning, over something so trivial he couldn't even remember what it was now. He had promised to call Emma that evening to ask how her trip had gone, but he never did. Daniel looked at his subordinates and saw his sadness reflected in their faces. Captain Laura Bennett stood at her tactical station with tears streaming down her cheeks. Her entire family lived in Mumbai, but now they were gone. Major Kevin Ortega stared at a blank screen that had only minutes before shown Mexico City. His parents, his siblings, his childhood friends, all gone in an instant. Dr. Lead scientist Fee Patricia Owens watched as the Geneva research facility where her team worked disappeared in a flash. Everyone in the room lost someone. Almost everyone lost everyone. For a long time, no one spoke. The weight of what had happened fell on them like a physical force. 7 billion people, 7 billion lives lost in 6 hours. It was too big a number to truly comprehend. It was easier to think about individual losses, a daughter who would never graduate from college, a wife who would never come home, parents who would never see their grandchildren. Daniel took a deep breath and tried to think clearly. Grief would come later. Now his people needed leadership. They think they're done, he said, his voice hushed but resonating throughout the bunker. They think they're done. He walked over to the main console and activated the holographic display. A map of the solar system appeared, marked with hundreds of small icons. These were humanity's hidden assets, things the Velkari didn't even know existed. 17 deep space shipyards hidden in the asteroid belt. 412 warships built in secrecy over the past century. A weapons platform disguised as a mining base. A research facility buried in the ice of a distant moon. And another project built in secrecy by fewer than 50 people in the entire solar system. Project Prometheus, Daniel said, pointing to a facility hidden in Saturn's rings. Dr. Owens, how's it going? Patricia wiped her eyes and checked her tablet. Her voice was slightly shaky, but her words were clear. "We're 70% complete, Admiral. With enough resources, we can finish it within 18 months. Let's make it 12, Daniel said. "We'll provide whatever you need." He turned to his officers. These men and women were all that remained of Earth Command. They were devastated and heartbroken, but still alive. And as long as they were alive, humanity had a chance. The Velkari believe they have destroyed us today. They believe we are a scattered group of refugees waiting to be enslaved. Daniel said. They're wrong. They had made the worst mistake a conqueror could make. They had attacked humanity but had failed to complete their mission. He pointed to a display showing 3 Velkari cruisers orbiting the Earth. Those ships represented everything they thought of us. A token force, an insult. They hadn't even scanned the underground facilities. They hadn't searched for any surviving military-trained personnel. They assumed we would simply accept defeat because all the other races had done it. Laura Bennett spoke, her voice still wet with tears, but strong. "What are your orders, Admiral?" Daniel looked at her and saw something familiar in her eyes, not just sadness, but anger. Cool, focused, patient, rage strong enough to withstand years of hardship. Daniel said, "We hide, we rebuild, we prepare, and when the time comes, we will show humanity what it means to despair. 7 billion people died today. We will make sure the Velkari remember them all." He looked around the room, at his men. "The occupying forces will expect us to submit. Instead, we will go underground. Colonel Marcus Webb is already leading resistance across the planet. Our people will survive and wait. Meanwhile, we will build a fleet in secret. We will complete Project Prometheus. And when we are ready, we will teach the Velkari Empire a lesson they will never forget." The officers straightened up. The desperation was still there in their eyes. But now there was something else added. Purpose. "They killed 7 billion of us," Daniel said quietly. "They will make them pay for every single one of our lives. This is not over. This is only the beginning." 3 years had passed since the Earth had burned up. The survivors lived like refugees on the ruins of their planet, surviving in makeshift settlements built from the rubble of their destroyed cities, cultivating the contaminated soil, drinking filtered water, and trying to rebuild what they had lost, while the Velkari occupying forces watched them from orbit with nothing but contempt. The 3 cruisers rotated their crews every 6 months. Each time the Velkari soldiers arrived, they expected to find injured people waiting for enslavement. Instead, they found only humans who bowed their heads and did as they were told. The aliens did not realize that something was brewing beneath this docile surface. Colonel Marcus Webb was off-planet during the bombardment, commanding a small patrol ship in the outer planetary system. He watched helplessly as Earth was destroyed, then spent 3 months secretly returning to planet. Now he leads the resistance, coordinating with hundreds of troops scattered across the continent. His men gathered intel on the occupying forces, pilfered supplies from Velkari outposts, mapped every patrol route, noted every weak spot, and then they waited. At the edge of the solar system, Admiral Daniel Harper worked 18-hour days, preparing for his moment of revenge. In secret shipyards, warships were being constructed at a pace unthinkable before the attack. Humanity's greatest engineers and scientists now pursued a single goal with a dedication born from law. Captain Laura Bennett commanded the aircraft carrier USS Defiance, flagship of what the survivors called the Ghost Fleet. Her 3,000 crew members had been lost in a bombardment. They trained with an almost ferocious intensity, running simulated battles 16 hours a day. Every pilot memorized attack patterns so well they could execute them in their sleep. Every gunner practiced their aim with precision. The Velkari had never before achieved. One night, Lola was pacing the ship, and found a young pilot named Danny Cole staring at a photograph. The photo showed a woman and her 2 young children smiling at the camera. "My wife and kids," Danny said without looking up. They were in Denver. Laura sat next to him. "I lost my family in Mumbai. My parents, my sister, my nieces." Danny finally looked at her. "Will it make you feel better?" Laura said honestly. "But it becomes clear. The grief lingers, but the resolve only grows stronger." They will pay for their actions. Each of us will never forget the price the Velkari paid for their attack on humanity. Daenerys nodded slowly, putting the photo away. When will we fight? Laura said, soon, soon. Dr. Patricia Owens completed Project Prometheus 2 months ahead of schedule. The technology it represented would change everything. Humanity had discovered a way to destabilize the hyperspace corridors, the tunnels through folded space that starships used to travel between star systems. By placing Prometheus devices in key locations, humanity could trap enemy fleets in conventional space, denying them any opportunity to retreat or be reinforced. Admiral Harper reviewed the final test results, and for the first time in 3 years, smiled slightly. The Velkari were unaware of this technology. They would soon understand. All ships, prepare for the return mission. Admiral Harper announced to the Ghost Fleet. It is time to reclaim our world. The attack came without warning on a quiet morning. Human stealth ships emerged from the darkness between worlds, their advanced systems preventing the Velkari's sensors from detecting their presence until they opened fire. The 3 occupation cruisers had no time to mobilize their shields or equip their weapons, and were destroyed within 90 seconds of the start of the battle. On Earth, the Resistance, led by Marcus Webb, launched a simultaneous attack. After 3 years of preparation, they had memorized every Velkari installation on Earth. They raided fuel depots, communications centers, and barracks with surgical precision. The garrison of 50,000 Velkari soldiers was attacked simultaneously from all sides. The battle lasted less than a day. By nightfall, not a single Velkarian remained on Earth or in its orbit. The occupation was over. Humanity's first victory sent shockwaves through the Empire. When news reached Imperial High Command 3 weeks later, they struggled to comprehend what had happened. Without warning, a subdued species had wiped out an occupying force. It seemed impossible. Imperial analysts concluded it must have been a lucky break by the desperate survivors. It had cost humanity everything it had. Now they were defenseless. Admiral Kesavor offered to officially command a conquest fleet. He was a veteran of 37 conquests and had never known defeat. The High Command had given him 200 warships, more than enough to crush the resistance of the primitive races. His fleet arrived in the Thor system, expecting to find frightened refugees begging for mercy. Instead, they were ambushed by the Ghost Fleet near Neptune. Laura Bennett stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching the Velkari fleet emerge from hyperspace. 200 enemy ships against 93 human warships. The numbers were small, but numbers had never defined human strength before. It was all fleet. "This is Admiral Bennett," she announced over the fleet comms. Laura had been promoted just a few days earlier for her leadership. "The enemy believes their superior numbers guarantee victory. They have never fought an enemy they had nothing to lose. Today we will show them what it means." The battle lasted 11 hours. The human ships worked together in a way the Velkari had never seen before. They predicted the enemy's formations and exploited weaknesses they should never have seen. They sacrificed damaged ships to protect vital assets, and turned every tactical situation to their advantage. The Velkari fought bravely, but bravery was not enough. One by one their ships fell to the weapons of humanity. Admiral Kesavor watched in disbelief as his fleet collapsed around him. He had conquered 37 worlds, and now he was being defeated by a race the Empire considered primitive. When the battle was over, 89 ships of the Velkari fleet were destroyed. The remaining 13 fled into hyperspace, taking with them legends of shield-defying human weaponry, tactics that ignored military doctrine, and soldiers fighting with a ferocity the Velkari had never seen before. Admiral Harper stood in the command center of his flagship and wrote a message to the Imperial City. His words were simple and direct. 7 billion. We're here to retrieve you. He sent a message across all frequencies, then turned to his officer. The Ghost Fleet had proven itself in battle, but this was only the beginning. The Velkari Empire had thousands of ships and millions of soldiers. The real war had only just begun. "Set course for the nearest Imperial supply line," Harper ordered. The Empire was on the verge of realizing that attacking humanity had been its worst mistake. The destruction of Admiral Kesavor's fleet sent ripples of panic through the Velkari Empire. For 12,000 years, No species had successfully resisted their military might. Now a civilization they once despised as primitive had destroyed over 200 warships and sent a threatening message to the imperial city. Emperor Velkos Nim called a council of war and demanded an explanation. How had this happened? Humanity was supposed to be shattered and defeated, planets bombarded, cities destroyed, and populations scattered as refugees. Yet somehow they were building a fleet capable of defeating the imperial forces. The council had no satisfactory answers. Their intelligence had completely failed. They were unaware of the existence of hidden shipyards and underground facilities. They had no idea that humanity had been preparing for alien contact for over a century. They had made assumptions based on past conquests. These assumptions proved catastrophically wrong. Grand Admiral Velkos, the Imperium's most respected military commander, proposed a solution: assemble the largest fleet the Empire has ever seen and crush the human rebellion forever. The Emperor approved the plan, granting Velkos unlimited resources. Over the next 8 months, 12,000 warships converged on the Imperial stronghold, a larger fleet than any the Empire had ever fielded before. Velkos was convinced that no foe could stand against such overwhelming force. However, humanity did not sit idly by during these 8 months. The Ghost Fleet expanded significantly as new ships emerged from hidden construction yards. Admiral Daniel Harper was in command of over 600 warships at the time, with new ones being added every week. But numbers alone were not enough to defeat 12,000. They needed something more powerful, and Dr. Patricia Owens provided that power. Project Prometheus was fully operational, and her team was developing new applications for the technology. They were able to create a hyperspace suppression field, large enough to cover an entire star system. Any enemy fleet trapped in this field would be trapped, unable to retreat or call for reinforcements. Captain Kevin Ortega, commander of the battleship Reckoning at the time, devised a strategy to weaken the enemy before the main battle. He called it Burning Path, and it was brutally simple. The human strike force was targeting the supply lines that kept the Imperial fleet afloat. Without fuel and munitions, even 12,000 ships would eventually be useless. Kevin personally led the first wave, his task force of 30 ships striking without warning at a major supply depot in the KA system. The Velkari defenses numbered over 100 ships, but they were spread out to protect multiple facilities. Kevin's forces focused their attacks on one facility at a time, overwhelming the defenders with concentrated firepower before moving on to the next target. In just 1 week, his forces destroyed 17 logistics facilities. The repercussions spread throughout the Imperial fleet, and ships began to run low on supplies. Maintenance schedules fell behind and combat readiness was declining. Meanwhile, Admiral Laura Bennett led her carrier force on an even more daring mission. Intelligence had pinpointed the location of Velkari's main shipyards on Cuth Prime, the Empire's industrial heartland. If the facility were destroyed, the enemy would lose the ability to replace their losses in battle. The approach took 3 weeks, involving careful navigation through enemy territory. Lola's ships operated at minimum power on all systems, hiding behind asteroid fields and gas giants to avoid detection. The crew lived on emergency rations, slept in shifts, and were constantly prepared for battle. They arrived on Cuth Prime on what would become a human holiday. The shipyards were vast, dwarfing everything humanity had ever built. Hundreds of warships in various stages of construction crammed into the docking bays. Thousands of workers traversed the corridors. Lola gave the order to attack at dawn local time. The fighters took off in perfect formation, their pilots displaying the precision they had trained for months. The shipyard's defenses were strong, but they were designed to repel conventional attacks. The human tactics were completely different. Lola lost half her fighters in the battle. The pilots she had trained, young men and women who were like family to her, were killed in the attack. But the shipyards fell, fuel tanks caught fire, reactors went critical, and massive structures were destroyed in explosions. Entire facilities collapsed into burning ruin. The Velkari had lost major construction capabilities. Rebuilding would take years. Grand Admiral Velkos grew alarmed as he heard news of these disasters. His massive fleet hadn't even engaged the enemy yet, and his strategic position was already deteriorating. He made a decision that would determine the outcome of the war: march straight for Earth, and force humanity into a defensive battle. If they fled, their home planet would be destroyed once again. If they held their ground, they would be overwhelmed by his superior numbers. This was exactly what Admiral Harper had hoped for. Humanity had been preparing the Sol system for this moment for 3 years. Autonomous weapons platforms disguised as mining devices were hidden in the asteroid belt. Millions of mines floated in interplanetary space, and most importantly, Prometheus devices were placed at every hyperspace exit. When Velkari's fleet of 12,000 ships arrived, they found themselves trapped. The moment they emerged from hyperspace, a containment field was activated, completely eliminating any possibility of retreat. They had to either break through the human defenses or perish in the attempt. The Battle of Thor system became the largest naval battle in galactic history. 12,000 Velkari warships faced off against 800 human ships. The odds were stacked against them, but the humans chose this location. Every pilot knew the terrain. Every gunner had trained their fire with precision. Every captain knew his role in the battle plan. The battle lasted for 14 hours. One by one, the Velkari ships were caught in the traps and sunk like the waves. The human ships moved through the chaos in perfect coordination, concentrating fire on key targets and disappearing before the enemy could return fire. Admiral Harper commanded from his flagship, adjusting the battle plan in real time whenever the opportunity arose. Grand Admiral Verkus watched his fleet fall apart and could not understand why. He had been in dozens of battles, but he had never seen anything like this. It was as if the humans knew what he was going to do before he actually did it. They exploited every weakness in his formation. They were willing to sacrifice ships to achieve their tactical objectives. Towards the end, Verkus sent a message to the human flagship. "Who are you?" he asked. Admiral Laura Bennett replied, "We are human beings, and we remember every single one you have killed." The last Velkari ship was destroyed 8 hours later. 12,000 warships, the pride of the Empire, were destroyed. Not a single ship escaped to deliver the news of defeat. The tide of the war had turned. The Empire was bleeding, and humanity was engulfed in the very tide. The destruction of Grand Admiral Verkus's 12,000 ships shook the military foundations of the Velkari Empire. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Empire faced an enemy that could not be defeated by force alone. When news of the disaster reached the capital, panic descended upon the royal court. Admiral Daniel Harper knew that destroying the fleet alone would not be enough. The Empire still controlled vast industrial resources. Given time, it would be able to rebuild its military and return in greater force. Humanity needed to end this threat forever. He called a meeting of his senior commanders aboard his new flagship, the Vengeance. Laura Bennett, Kevin Ortega, Marcus Webb, and Patricia Owens gathered around a tactical display as Prime Minister Harper outlined the plan. "It's not enough to simply destroy their military," Harper explained. "We must eradicate their ability to wage war. That means targeting their shipyards, weapons factories, training facilities, and resource extraction facilities. No civilians will be harmed, but all symbols of imperial military might will be eliminated." Laura nodded slowly. "The territory we must protect is vast. The Empire spans thousands of star systems, which is why we need allies," Harper said. "The Velkari have conquered hundreds of species over millennia, many of whom still live under imperial rule and are forced to serve their conquerors. If we could free them, they might join our cause." Marcus Webb had studied intelligence reports on conquered peoples. The Tetsukai seemed a likely candidate. They had been enslaved for 8,000 years, but sources said they still had memories of freedom. Their homeworld had been lightly defended since the bulk of the imperial forces were deployed with work. So Harper decided, we should start there. The liberation of Tetsukai Prime met the template for subsequent operations. Marcus personally led the ground forces, and the Marines descended from orbit in the early hours of the morning. The Velkari garrison numbered 10,000 soldiers, but was spread across a dozen military bases. Marcus attacked them one by one, overwhelming each position with superior tactics before the others could counterattack. The Tetsukai watched in amazement as human soldiers fought and died to free them. For 8,000 years, They had believed the Velkari invincible. Now they witnessed alien warriors fall before strange newcomers from a distant star. As the last Velkari base surrendered, Marcus walked the streets of the capital. The people of Take came out of their hiding places to stare at him. A girl, her 4 eyes wide with shock, approached cautious. "Are you sure you've come to free us?" she asked. Marcus knelt down to meet her gaze. "Yes, the Empire has killed billions of people. We know how much we suffer from their attacks. No one should have to live like that." Her mother pulled her back, still terrified. But within days, the fear began to fade. Human soldiers helped repair destroyed infrastructure, distributed food to starving families, and treated the wounded without asking for anything in return. The Tetsukai elders met with Admiral Harper and offered him something valuable in exchange for his release: 8,000 years of accumulated knowledge about the Empire, its weaknesses, secrets, and infightings. Information that would have taken humanity decades to gather on its own. "We will fight at your side," the eldest Tetsukai declared. "Our warriors may not be as strong as they once were, but we remember how to build ships and weapons. Provide us with your technology and we will help you defeat the Empire." Harper accepted. An alliance was born. News of Tetsukai's liberation spread like wildfire across the galaxy. Other conquered species began to feel hopeful for the first time in centuries. On dozens of planets, resistance movements that had lain dormant for generations suddenly found new purpose. The next to join humanity's cause were the Volnus. Their civilization had been wiped out 3 centuries earlier, its people scattered across imperial space as laborers and slaves. Patricia Owens had been secretly in contact with Volnus, scientists who had preserved their people's knowledge despite centuries of oppression. When human forces liberated the research colony on Volnus, an icy moon on the outskirts of imperial space, Patricia was one of the first to land. She discovered thousands of scientists who had been forced to serve in the Empire's weapons development, and now they were using their expertise against their former masters. "We had developed technologies the Empire had never known. Hidden in our research, among our failed experiments, is a system that can neutralize the Empire's shields without destroying them, a weapon that can target military infrastructure while leaving civilian areas untouched." The Volus lead researcher told Patricia. Patricia's eyes lit up. This was what humanity needed, a way to wage war against the Empire without becoming monsters themselves. The campaign accelerated. Human and allied forces attacked Imperial territory across a vast front. Kevin Ortega led a human and Tetsukai fleet in a devastating raid on the Imperial weapons manufacturing center on Vorson. Laura Bennett led simultaneous attacks on 3 shipyards, her forces appearing and disappearing before the battered Imperial Navy could respond. By the 4th year of the war, humanity had gained allies from 17 species. The Allied forces called themselves the Alliance of Free Peoples and placed Admiral Harper at their command. They deployed over 2,000 warships and millions of ground troops. Emperor Vilkas the Kamens witnessed the Empire's collapse, but refused to accept reality. He ordered the Allied forces to launch increasingly desperate attacks, throwing ships into battle without proper support or coordination. With each defeat, the collapse accelerated. The final offensive against Velkari Prime began on the 5th anniversary of the bombardment of Earth. Admiral Laura Bennett's assault fleet contained 2,000 human and allied ships. Facing her was an Imperial Guard fleet of 500 ships, composed entirely of the Empire's last defenders, the Velkari nobility. The battle lasted for 2 days. The Imperial Guard fought with suicidal determination, knowing that defeat would mean the end of everything their people had built over 12,000 years. But their determination was no match for superior numbers and tactics. With the last Imperial Guard ship destroyed, human marines landed on Velkari Prime for the first time. They marched through the capital and towards the Imperial Palace, encountering sporadic resistance from the Royal Guard and fanatical loyalists. Marcus Webb personally led the assault on the Imperial Palace. His marines breached the walls, fighting room after room until they finally reached the throne room, where they discovered Emperor Voloth Nim fleeing through a hidden passageway. "Are you going somewhere?" Marcus asked as soldiers surrounded the Emperor. Velkari stared at the human with pure hatred. "You destroyed everything. A 12,000-year-old civilization wiped out by primitive humans," Marcus replied. You killed 7 billion innocent people, children, families, and entire cities perished because we refused to be your slaves. Do you think we deserve nothing? The emperor had no answer. He was chained and taken away to face justice. The war was over. The Velkari Empire was gone. It surrendered 6 months after the fall of their homeland. Imperial governors across 100,000 star systems lowered their flags and accepted the authority of the League of Free Peoples. For the first time in 12,000 years, the galaxy was free from Velkari rule. Admiral Harper stood before the newly formed Council of Free Peoples and presented his proposal for a peace agreement. Representatives from 23 races filled the chamber. Each was there because humanity fought to liberate them. The Velkari committed crimes against countless civilizations. They killed billions of people and enslaved hundreds of races. Harper said, "Justice requires retribution, but we must be careful not to become like the people we fought against." He outlined a proposal that balanced accountability and mercy. The Velkari would be confined to their home system for 500 years. They would have no military capabilities beyond basic planetary defense. They would pay reparations to species they had wronged, but they would not be exterminated or enslaved, as some voices had called for. "We are better than they are," Harper told the council. "We fought this war because we believe all people deserve freedom and dignity. If we abandon these principles now, we will win the war but lose our souls." The vote was unanimous. The Velkari would survive, but their empire would end forever. Earth itself was being rebuilt. Terraforming technology provided by grateful allies was accelerating the healing of the damaged planet. The radiation from the bombardment was being cleansed. Craters where cities once stood were being transformed into monuments and gardens. From the ashes, new cities rose, built by survivors stronger than ever after enduring the greatest atrocities in human history. Humanity not only survived extinction, but led a coalition that liberated billions of life forms across the galaxy. Admiral Laura Bennett returns to Earth for the first time since the start of the war. She boards a transport ship bound for the coast of what was once India, where Mumbai was located before the bombing. Her family has lived there for generations. Her parents run a small restaurant near the port, and her sister is studying medicine at university. Her nieces were 7 and 9 years old. They were all gone in an instant, along with millions of others. Laura stood in a memorial garden in what was once the city center. Nearby, construction drones were working, building an obelisk that would eventually bear the names of 7 billion people, the memory of all those who died in the bombing. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Kevin Ortega approaching. He brought 2 coffee cups and offered one to her. The two had grown close over the long war, and they understood each other's losses. "The council voted today," Kevin said. "The final decision regarding the Velkari settlement." Laura accepted her coffee and the vote was unanimous. They had been trapped in their home system for 500 years. No military power, no expansion. They must learn to live as a single planetary species. "Some wanted more," Laura said quietly. Kevin nodded. General Tessikal advocated complete disarmament and permanent occupation. The Volnes representative wanted reparations that would impoverish them for centuries. What did Harper say? He reminded them why they fought this war. Not for vengeance, but for justice. Not to destroy the Velkari, but to ensure they could never threaten anyone again. Any cruel act, he said, would dishonor the memory of all those who had died. Laura watched the obelisk take shape before her eyes. 7 billion names. It would take decades to inscribe them all. "Do you think we did the right thing?" she asked. "All of it? The war, the killing, the destruction. We saved billions of people across the galaxy, but we also killed millions of Velkarians. Their soldiers, their crews, and their leaders. Most of them were just following orders." Kevin mulled the question over before answering. "I usually think about it a lot when I'm trying to sleep. Sometimes I see their faces. The Velkaris I killed personally, and those who died because of my orders." He takes a sip of his coffee, but then he remembers Earth. He remembers watching Mexico City burn while his parents were still inside. He remembers 7 billion people dying because the Velkaris saw us as nothing more than primitives to be conquered. "So do you think it was worth it?" "I think it was necessary. We didn't start this war, we didn't ask to be attacked. We simply refused to accept extinction. Everything that followed grew from that refusal. Laura turned to him. The galaxy is different now. Humanity is no longer just a species. We destroyed the Empire. Other civilizations look to us for leadership. It's a heavy responsibility. Really, but we've proven we can shoulder it. 5 years ago we were refugees on a devastated world. Now we're helping to build a coalition of free peoples across thousands of star systems. She raised her coffee cup toward the monument. For 7 billion people, we haven't forgotten them. We never will, and we made their deaths meaningful. The empire that murdered them is gone. The species that enslaved them are free. The galaxy is safer than it has been in 12,000 years. Kevin raised his cup. For 7 billion people they stood together in silence, watching the sun set over the Garden of Remembrance. All around them, the sounds of construction echoed. New buildings rose, new roads were laid, and new life returned to damaged worlds. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out on hundreds of planets. Former slaves celebrated their freedom, and shattered civilizations began to rebuild. After millennia of hostility, species learned to work together as part of an alliance of free people. And at the center of it all was humanity, a species pushed to the brink of extinction, but resisting with determination, not despair. We lost 7 billion lives but saved billions more. We suffered unimaginable tragedy, but emerged stronger than before. Admiral Daniel Harper retired a year after the end of the war. He dedicated the rest of his life to building memorials to commemorate all those who died in the bombing. He never remarried, and although he continued to mourn the deaths of his wife and daughter, he found peace in knowing that their deaths were not in vain. Laura Bennett became the first human commander of the Alliance Defense Fleet, defending a bloody peace. Kevin Ortega served as her second in command. Together they trained a new generation of officers who would never know the horrors of the bombardment, but who would carry its lessons into the future. Marcus Webb returned to Earth and helped rebuild the city he once fought to defend. He established an academy for young men aspiring to serve in the Alliance military, teaching them that power without mercy is tyranny, and mercy without strength is weakness. Patricia Owens continued her research, working with scientists from the 12 races to develop technology that would benefit all. Her discoveries helped heal the wounded planet and feed the hungry. And on Earth, in a memorial garden built where a great city once stood, children played among the monuments. They were not young enough to remember the bombings, but they had grown up hearing the stories. They knew that humanity had survived and what humanity had achieved. 7 billion people are gone, but they are not forgotten. Their memory lives on in every free people of the galaxy, in every child who grew up without fear of conquest, in every civilization that thrived because humanity refused to admit defeat. This is their legacy, their victory, and it will last forever.